Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Personalization Outbreak Podcast. This is episode 2 of season 2 in 2021. Last week, we talked about the challenges our educational system is faced with and how student centricity can play a big role in preparing our students to confront the world and transform society. This week, we shift gears to the corporate sector to address how an employee-centric approach can have a significant impact in how we lead in times of crises. We will talk about how a Fortune 5 organization had to adapt to the uncertainties of 2020 and saw that as an opportunity rather than a challenge for their employees to be true to their shared mission. Our guest today is Jeff Pilof. Jeff is the Senior Vice President of Supply Chain at CVS Health. Jeff oversees the supply chain strategy and operations for all 9,800 CVS stores, e-commerce, and long-term care pharmacy delivery. Now, I've been working with Jeff for years, and as you experience Jeff, you'll understand why I refer to him as the Pathfinder, someone who believes that there's always a better way to achieve your goals and evolve if you have the end game in mind. For those of you who watched the Leadership in the Age of Personalization virtual summit in October 2020 in our 2019 summit series, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Let's get started. You are listening to Personalization Outbreak, a podcast about the collapse of traditional corporate standards in today's more personalized world. I'm Glenn Yopes. I'm a leadership strategist, author, contributor to Forbes, and founder of the Leadership in the Age of Personalization movement. On this show, I'm interviewing executives across multiple sectors to find out how the balance between standardization and personalization can exist. Jeff, it's great to have you with us today. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here, Glenn. Thanks for inviting me.
So tell us a little bit about the Pathfinder. I mean, I can't let you escape that one. I mean,
Sure.
What is it that makes you the Pathfinder, and how does it show up at work?
Yeah, well, I think you said it sort of well. I'd say probably what gives me distinction as a leader is that I tend to look at most situations that are presented to me as opportunity. And when I look at them as opportunity, I tend to think of it as where are we trying ultimately to get to and how do we work our way there, right? So hence the idea of the end in mind is we'll figure out the journey, but where are we ultimately trying to get to? And let's start at that point. And that's really how I tend to approach most things, in my role.
Well, I think given the subject matter of today's conversation, the Pathfinder is going to come in handy because let's face it, Jeff, CVS has been at the forefront of putting people on a path to better health during this pandemic. And so as the Pathfinder, from both a supply chain and leadership standpoint, Jeff, can you perhaps share some behind the scenes perspective of the happenings that most people throughout the country just wouldn't be aware of? I mean, I can't imagine what you and your team and the entire enterprise has been going through. Any shared perspectives? Again, maybe some behind the scenes that would make us even further appreciate the great work that CVS Health has done over the past year and a half.
Yeah, I think I can probably shed a little bit of light there. As you mentioned, our purpose, has been and continues to be to help people on their path to better health. And I think in the future, we'll see that as helping every individual on their path to better health. But as you look at a year like we've just gone through in 2020 and where we are starting 2021, we like everyone else in America have had to respond right to this great opportunity before us, which is how to respond to a pandemic, and truly live on that purpose of helping people on their path to better health. And when I think behind the scenes, I look at a tremendous body of work that's occurred, and frankly, to be truly appreciative of the hundreds and hundreds of people who have been trying to figure things out, and then the many thousands of people who have been out there on the front lines making it happen. It's an extraordinary effort, and we're a big company, right? One of the largest companies in America. And I don't know that necessarily large companies are typically considered to be the most agile in the world. And yet I look at the fact that less than a year ago, if we've been having this conversation, we might not even be talking about COVID. And here we are a year later, having been an industry participant and leader in everything from keeping colleagues safe so that they can be out in the community providing services and being in our stores to help patients and customers, to our role in testing for COVID. We've been in underserved communities. We've been in business-to-business programs. We've obviously had a very large footprint with our retail stores and have provided millions upon millions of tests. And then certainly now, right, the emerging program around vaccination and all the work that we've been blessed to be able to be a participant in conjunction with the industry and with government. And so I look at all the work that we've done and realize that from a historical lens, you can't really say in this since there was an end in mind, because we didn't know what the end was going to be. And so what I've seen behind the scenes is just a tremendous amount of open-mindedness and positive intent as we have collaborated internally inside the supply chain to do things we never did before, as well as how do we do the same thing with our other partners in CVS Retail, in CVS, the enterprise of CVS Health, with the local communities, the state governments, the federal Operations Warp Speed, and et cetera, just to understand how we're going to make this happen when nobody had a real rule book, right, to apply to this. It's been an extraordinary effort. But because of that purpose that I mentioned at the onset of helping people on their path to better health, that's always been our guide. That's really enabled us to stay firm and committed and put in the work needed.
Now, Jeff, if I could, a couple things crossed my mind as you were sharing those, what's taking place behind the scenes. I don't know if you caught yourself, but you said taking on the opportunity of the pandemic. You didn't call it a crisis. You called it opportunity. And again, maybe I'll listen in just a moment, but it seems to me that maybe the opportunity was to find yourself in a moment, a defining moment where every associate, every individual at CVS found themselves with the opportunity to put people on a path to better health. That's how I interpreted that. Any thoughts? I mean, people keep talking about, the chaos, the crises, but you saw it as an opportunity. At least that's what you've led me, the way you described it.
Sure.
Why did you call it an opportunity?
Well, certainly it would be ignorant of me to not acknowledge, right, the crisis and the lives that have been affected and the lives that have been lost, and people have put themselves out there, right, to be the difference makers on the front line. When I say it's an opportunity to either do nothing and accept the status quo, or it's an opportunity to get involved and be part of the solution, right? Even when we didn't know exactly what the solution was going to be or when was it going to occur. So when I see the opportunity is the idea we elected to turn the best that we could of it into an opportunity to live out our purpose so that we could help the communities that we live in. I think if we had in fact, I would even say the answer is I don't know how we could have done otherwise, right? Because that's just who we are at CVS Health, and that's how we live out that purpose. It is an opportunity, and we saw it as such to be a difference maker.
I got chills, and I'll tell you why. Is that I feel that during this entire pandemic, look, you could look at things the glass half full or the glass half empty, and I felt that there was a lot of people that didn't know what to do. And the fact that you looked at it as an opportunity, I know that that's not being misconstrued as, sell more or generate more revenue. It was an opportunity to live out the mission. And, we've, as you well know, in corporate America, many, if not all companies are very mission driven, mission focused. And yet the individuals, whether it's the associate or whether it's the customer, really get to feel that mission come to life. So when you said opportunity, I'm inspired by that because, you just never know when the moment calls for that mission to come to life. And I think a lot of things could have gone wrong, even though the playbook wasn't written for the moment. But again, I just appreciate that perspective, Jeff, because I think for anyone who's listening, they should pay very careful. In fact, I'd have them go back to when you started to talk about the behind the scenes and how you saw this as an opportunity, because we're still living 2020 right now. And we all need to connect to our mission and think about how we as individuals who work for our organizations can be better individual contributors to that mission. Because there's going to be a story to tell after all this is said and done, Jeff. And I know you know that.
Absolutely. And
go ahead.
Well, I was going to add one thought to that. I look at, there's so many people in my organization that I am very thankful for. And what I'm most thankful for is that they never even questioned, why am I putting in this amount of time? Why am I doing this? Is it for someone else's mission? Is it for the company? But rather, I think in this instance, while there have certainly been tremendous demands and sacrifices that people have made, I think they've seen it as, this is my individual way that I can contribute to addressing this pandemic. And that has given people that fortitude required to be able to sacrifice, additional time spent doing things they would normally do, or, how they view what hours are considered your, time at work or your time at home. Because I think, well, of course, a lot of those people have been working from home, which doesn't actually make it much easier. But I do think the point I'm trying to make there is that I think this is a way that inherently just connects with people. How can I make a difference? Just like the volunteer who wants to volunteer, who is certified and capable of helping vaccinate people, right, and put shots in arms, that wants to be able to help. If ever there was an opportunity in our country to talk around a unifying rally in a time when there's not a whole lot of unity, certainly the response that is here, put aside the layers and the politics and the media and all that, individuals, I think, feel that they want to be part of this solution, right? They want to do anything they can to see us get beyond this. And that's powerful.
Powerful. So on that note, Jeff, it's clear that you've put the individual at the center of the happenings. So here's maybe an unexpected question. How would you have defined individual centricity, whether that's obviously the customer, in this case, the patient, or the employee? Well, how do you think most organizations, or if you want to take a personal stab at it from a leadership perspective, would have thought of centricity pre-pandemic? And how do you think people are thinking about it now?
Sure, and I'll take that in more of a commerce maybe perspective to answer this question initially. Sure. When I think of the path that our country has been on to move to digital commerce, certainly no surprise. Year over year, large double-digit growth, and companies, of course, fitting somewhere along the spectrum of taking advantage of that opportunity that has presented itself. And then you get to a situation like 2020, where it was no longer about, I'll call it desire or want. It was about need. Right? People, in order to survive, needed to engage through their phone, right? Or through the devices. They needed services and products to be brought to their home. They couldn't go out in many cases and be amongst other people, whether it was because of social distancing requirements that were, set forth, or whether it was because of their own personal health condition. So when you look at a year like, we've just gone through, that curve for e-commerce or for digital commerce, took off even faster. right? And so when I look now at where we are and where we're going, I've got to imagine that it'd be hard to find a company that isn't thinking about what is going to be the new normal, right? Or the post-pandemic normal, because it's been a long enough time. There's been enough adoption. There's been enough progress made that it's highly unlikely to believe we would go back, right? That we would go back to even what the world looked like at the beginning of 2020. And so companies have been absolutely forced to think differently, right? And so you mentioned centricity and individual, right? Individuality, individual customer centricity, right? This whole journey now, there's so many more options for a consumer to consider to how they need to get their thing done, whatever that thing is, that it's forced companies to finally have to focus on the customer's journey first, and not the customers with an S and an apostrophe, but the customer apostrophe S, the customer's journey, and figure out how do I meet that customer where he or she needs me to be for that transaction that they have right then and there. And that is a very personal, if you will, experience. And companies have not been forced to figure that out on a massive scale, right? Massive personalization, I think anywhere near as much as emerged in 2020 and will continue on in 2021.
Powerful. So Jeff, I have to pause and say, in an industry like healthcare, I mean, let's remind our listeners and viewers that, CVS has been through this transformation since the acquisition of Aetna in 2018. It's 2018, right, Jeff?
Correct.
2018, from being a retailer, right, to now being a healthcare provider. Mm-hmm. So what can healthcare, who has claimed to be patient-centered for many years as part of its narrative, perhaps learn about what patient centricity really means given the experiences of CVS Health?
Sure. Well, yeah, I'd say that there's an unfortunate start to this answer. Unfortunately, for all of the best efforts of many partners, in the community, healthcare still remains a complicated problem, right, to solve for. It's still more difficult to navigate than what probably most of us would wish it to be, if not to believe it can be. It's still certainly very expensive. And so there's still so much space out there for solutions that solve those basic pain points, right? Make it simple, make it accessible, make it affordable. And what I think that the 2020 experience, probably contributed to that is that we couldn't use the same mechanisms that we were hanging on to in terms of how we engage with patients any longer, because the patients weren't even able to access those sort of lagging historical ways of doing things, going to the doctor, right? A new therapy start, getting an elective procedure, so many things that weren't even available, right? That has really forced our thinking to what are those opportunities ahead where we can, meet more patients where they are. So to, the telehealth, right? The massive opportunity in telehealth, and wearable health, and the various devices and things like that. And I think there's just been so much there that was forced, into the conversation, that when in the healthcare space, that the comfort zone essentially should be gone. There shouldn't even be a comfort zone left that we'll get to it in the future, or, gee, we see a problem and, we'll figure it out down the road. That time is like yesterday and today. And so I think it's forced the healthcare industry to have to, move faster with more urgency, and more curiosity to solve, how we reach the individual patient in a way that works for them and achieves those things I mentioned: simple, affordable, and accessible.
It's interesting. Yesterday, I had a conversation with an executive who does a lot of work with nurses, and her take was, Jeff, that it's remarkable how in healthcare historically, regulations was always the excuse. In how, when the pandemic struck, how all of a sudden those regulations became not meaningless, but they all of a sudden changed. on the moment's notice. And all of a sudden, payers, insurance companies started to pay for telehealth when for years there had been resistance. So I think this is the wake-up call that anything is possible. And I think that it's more about how do we seek discomfort in status quo to get us to where we need to go. So on that note, and I want to start moving a little bit more briskly here, and it's my fault because I've said too much, but let's talk about centricity from an employee standpoint. I mean, what did you see that changed? I mean, you talked a little bit about the behind the scenes earlier. What changed in 2021 and do you see that those changes will remain permanent?
Sure. So I would say this, first of all, nothing was as it seemed, right? So when you I think of the world as in 2020 as being two different groups of people. Those that were able to take shelter, right? It's almost like create more of a bubble, work from home, sort of being that, if you will, element of the discussion. And then those that couldn't. Right, the nature of their work or their life, required them to engage. Regardless of which one you were, it wasn't business as usual. So if you were a work from home person that had never been a work from home person, there's a lot of change required, right, to adapt to that new environment and be successful. If you're a person who didn't have that opportunity and still sort of went out into the world each day to do your work, I don't think probably many people left their doorstep or crossed their doorstep to go out into the world without thinking a little bit different about the world around them and taking precautions for their safety and what was going to be open and can I do this? Can I do that? Right. So I don't think there would be anybody, right, who could say that they weren't affected by that. And so therefore the response to that, right, becomes, there had to be a lot of communication and there had to be a lot of thinking carefully about how to take care of people, particularly everybody who ventured beyond their doorstep, and how to make sure that we were able to continue to be effective at doing what we do when we didn't have the traditional norm of an office space, right, or a departmental meeting, or any of those types of things that have been around forever. So I think that everybody, every walk of life, right, was affected by the fact that what they were used to no longer existed. It just wasn't business as usual. And so I look at that what my colleagues have been able to do at CVS Health, and it does make me laugh for a moment to remember all the time we spent pre-COVID talking about whether or not we could, enable more flexible work schedules, or could somebody work from home for a day every so often, and how it seemed like somewhat of an arduous task to find the right balanced solution that met everybody's needs and ensured that people stayed productive, et cetera. Well, COVID comes along, wipes all that out. I am amazed. I am truly amazed. And again, appreciative of we didn't miss a beat. We didn't miss a beat. People went to wherever that place was, right, that they were now, that they now found themselves working from, and we kept right on going, right? And technology and, the tools such as Zoom and WebEx, et cetera, obviously are a big part of our success in doing that, but we didn't miss a beat. And so now when I say we didn't miss a beat, that means we still got outcomes, right?
Yeah. But
to the heart of your question, there's still a piece in there that says, but we didn't get them exactly the same way. Right, because each individual had to think differently about their environment. The company had to think about how can we accommodate these unique circumstances that are different for, there's no two people who are probably alike in their circumstances in this situation, and how can we foster environment and support that will enable people to continue to be successful. And so it really became a much more individualized thought process on a mass scale. In order to be able to be successful. And it's been outstanding.
Jeff, I've always said that personalization spooks standardization, and when threatened, standardization fights back hard. How hard did it fight It feels like they lost the battle.
I think standardization lost the battle for sure. That's a quick answer. What I'm interested to see going forward, right, is the question is the battle over, or was that just round 1, 2, or 3 of a 15-round fight?
Great.
So it wouldn't seem, from where I sit, logical to believe that pendulum's going to come back hard, and hit us in the face with a return to old status quo. But there certainly will be, points down the road where we will still have more, I guess, scenarios to address or more questions to be answered. I think of the simple thing like right now, by and large, in a work from home environment with a number of my colleagues that work from home, I know where to find them. They're at home working. Okay, I find them at home. But in the future, if we say, hey, you can work from home, that's fine. But it's okay to travel again, and it's okay to go about your business and engage in different things. Well, people aren't going to be where you know them to be. Yeah. Some people will probably prefer to work in an office. Some people, will be out on the road. Some people will do those types of things. And so now it won't be just as easy as saying, oh, I know where they are. They're at home. So will that cause us to become uncomfortable again or disjointed, or cause everyone to say, okay, we all have to go back to the office. We all have to go back to the way it was, right? There are still things that we'll solve for as we evolve going forward. But I don't imagine that. So I would say the battle's not over, but I think there's enough evidence to suggest we're probably not going to go back to the way it was.
Thank you, Jeff. So, okay, before we move on, Scott, what are you taking from Jeff here?
I'm seeing a pattern that makes me confident that this next unknown or uncertain part or challenge that comes before you, or we should call it with your terminology, opportunity that comes before you, isn't going to be a challenge from the CVS model. And the reason why is I'm actually seeing that, when we talk about industry transformation, right, what is kind of interesting about your approach, and tell me if I'm off on here, is that it seems like the transformation that you're doing for industry, or for your industry in particular, is patient employee centricity and leading in that. And here's what I mean. And here's where I saw it structurally. From an outsider looking in, and I want to hear your comments on this to see if this actually happened on purpose or this is just the way it was. I see that you've done something at CVS with the dialectic of mission and management. And I think what we're saying here is that you had a mission which was quite clear, right? I mean, I remember when mission statements used to be like this long, right? You create a corporation or something, this is your mission statement, but yours is this. It's easy, it's easy to focus on and easy to realize if we're doing something that's towards it or against it, contributing or not contributing. But here's the deal. I think what you gained when I look at this from the outside looking in by having mission is you're able to have mission be the management. Right? When you have a strong mission, management isn't as critical, because what you're doing with this mission, and by articulating it and reinforcing it and making sure every act, from stopping selling cigarettes to jumping from testing to vaccines, what you're doing is it's mission based. And when you have that mission, you actually can trust your employees, right, to do what they need to do in their capacity towards that mission. Whereas if that mission isn't clear, then the management had better be, because there's a whole bunch of people doing they don't know what. So you better manage them somehow so that there's some outcomes. And so what do you think about that? Is that something you think that actually was a conscious effort with CVS to essentially not replace management with mission, but literally to reduce the need for management sort of levels by just having the stronger mission as the unifier?
Yeah, that's a great observation. And there was a couple of things you said in there specifically that that really resonated. You mentioned the word trust, and I think about the idea that part of probably the old paradigm is based in a lack of trust, right? If I don't see you, I can't believe you're working. A really simplistic way of thinking about it. And we didn't have the luxury, if you will, of the old paradigm, and so therefore you had to essentially assume at first, right? And then as you inspect what you expect, you find, hey, wait a second, they didn't need me to tell them, to your point, to do something. They already both understand their job to begin with, but they also have passion for this pursuit, right? In our case, the purpose and the role we've played is a great example. And so I think the other way I look at that, I think that's a line of what you said is I've long been fond of the concept of discretionary effort. right? Which I've defined as being the difference. That gap is the difference between what you are willing to do versus what you have to do. And so when I think about, when the mission is what drives us, or when our purpose is what drives us, where we see, the impact that we can each make, our discretionary effort goes way up. Right? We're willing to put in that extra mile, or whatever the cliche is, because we can see how significant that contribution is. I know at times in the past, Glenn has spoken about the important, significance, right? And the importance of it's, do you know me? Do you recognize me? Do you appreciate me as an individual and what I do and what I have passion for? And I think we've seen that play out here. Right, we've seen that we don't have to sort of look over the shoulder of our peers, but rather the trust we can trust without a doubt, and they're led by the passion. They're not led because we told them to do something. It wasn't because of what they had to do. It's because what they want to do. And that's a much better starting point for progress than people doing what they have to do.
Yeah. And Scott, if I can jump in and continue, but Jeff fundamentally said that by having a mission that people can hold on to, that's simple, that people can learn how to connect themselves to, you become more inclusive. You awaken the human inside the individual. You stop thinking of so much about the result and more of the method that I can incorporate to be a better individual contributor. You start to connect your personal identity with that of the organizations. And these things start to synergize. They become one of the same. And that's powerful, Jeff, and great observation, Scott, because, my follow-up to Jeff is, which transformations do you fear the most moving forward, Jeff, for the potential to disrupt?
Without a doubt. So there's a couple that immediately come to mind. One, and I think I shared previously, I'm a bit concerned about going backward, right? Not because I have reason to believe it will, but because it could happen. Right. So, I'm not sure exactly what to use as the antithesis of transformation, but, reverting backward to old norms would always be a concern. So which I'll watch out. I think the second thing is, the particularly with the mobility in the workforce, that the flexible sort of work from home or remote work, right, type of world that will, I think, continue to move closer and closer to, it changes how we need to connect with each of our colleagues, right? To truly understand them, because what I think will make people, stay connected is purpose, which I've already mentioned, but it also will be that idea of, do you know me? Do you appreciate me? Me being the important part there. And it's one thing when you're naturally shoved together and you spend time together and in an old sort of work environment or an office-based environment. But for those people who have sort of now gone on to this remote work type of world, I can see a disconnection, right? So I think, what I would say there is maybe, again, it's a watch out, but I see it as, as we transform what it means to work, right? Work is what you do and not necessarily so much where you do it. Then we need to also understand that personalization, that connection will have to evolve as well, because we have to come up with new ways, to make sure that we are a connected community. So I see that. As far as I think the business transformation is concerned, right? I think the opportunity that we have at hand is to continue to challenge ourselves to push ahead with those things that we know are most important, right? So I think under normal times, particularly corporate behavior tends to be, we say things like fail fast, but we really don't want to fail. Or we say things like, like it's a stretch assignment, well, probably the stretch assignment is actually where we should be starting from, right? When I go back to the end in mind. Yeah. And instead of, the so much of the worry around the failure is we need to really think harder about going, into the future faster, with more vigor, right? More vigor and rigor. And so I look at that and I think that that's what the transformation, if you will, is going to require, is our ability to actually, stop doing things, right? That we just have always said, we need to do this and this and this and this. And maybe that list of ands needs to get shorter. And we need to make sure we really are investing in the things that are going to move the needle and where we're going. And less time spent, or less of a percentage of our time is spent on hanging on to the past and hanging on to what we've always known to be good. And I could go on with all kinds of examples, there. But I think that's really how I would think about the transformation that's ahead and how we need to address it.
Hey, Jeff, I wish we had a lot more time, but this is powerful. This notion of connected communities while being remote.
Yep.
I mean, this is a whole different way of how we need to think and lead, understand our people. I mean, think about it. Everyone has, those that have worked remotely, have experienced freedom, right? They've experienced the room to do things the way they want to do them while respecting standardization. But we've all learned how to adapt and become more agile in a less structured environment. Looking at you, here you are, an SVP, and you're working out of your home. By the way, you got a nice setup there too. But this whole sense of building a connected community while being disconnected from each other in terms of us being close together, it's powerful. Jeff, as you talked about making sure that we didn't fall back to old traditional norms, it reminds me just during this process, through the lens that I live through every day, having the great pleasure of speaking with progressive thinkers and leaders like you, of just how much time leaders never really thought about the future. And even more so now, everyone has just been heads down. My concern is that when they move their head up and recognize just how far away, how much work still needs to be done, will that be the trigger to fall back or fall forward? And I hope it's the latter. So with that, what outside skills or expertise do you think need to be incorporated to better prepare ourselves for the future, Jeff? Because I think we're learning that maybe some of those standardized ways of behaving maybe didn't quite cut it as we started to not just learn, but discover the capacities and capabilities of our people.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of thinking about it. And when I think of whether it's outside skills or the like, I don't know that I would describe what I think the need is as being an outside skill. I think I would describe the need as being embracing skills that we know already exist that we're not using. So when I think about going back to the idea of, and you mentioned sort of this remote community and how to be connected to people, that you don't have this natural breakfast to dinner time, share a conference room or office or a hallway. I think about the idea that we have to lean in terms of our investment of time to truly get to know people, because there was a lot of that occurred, but it occurred in the hallway, right? It occurred in the cafeteria. It occurred in a conference room in the minutes before a meeting started, or whatever the case was. And some of those forums, right, won't exist in sort of this new work ecosystem. And so I think it's about that idea of truly the desire, that resides in you, and the skills to build those relationships that are going to be, incredibly important, and not because of, certainly because of what you get out the productive work, right, and the progress and ingenuity that will come from the people who feel connected, but also for yourself, the satisfaction, right, of really feeling that you're contributing to the success of other people. So I see the skill set really not being anything that we don't already know. We just didn't have to invest as much in it, I think, maybe in the past, because the environment allowed for some of it, and we need to acknowledge that environment doesn't exist. So what are the alternative ways to recreate that, that relationship building that is so critical to individuality and bringing out the unique perspective that all of our workmates have.
Again, tremendous response, Jeff, and it makes me think of, how are we going to do 360s this year? What are we basing them off of? I mean, is it a fair statement, Jeff, that you've discovered a whole new enlightened set of skills from the people that you work with that maybe you thought were there, but you've really seen them come to light? Is that a fair statement?
Well, I think what I would say is we're certainly grabbing on to the importance of of various, even described as leadership behaviors, much less just, relationship type behaviors that we may not have invested as much time in. And I think we're realizing that the importance is just, it's hypercritical, now to invest in using the skills, using the time, and then using whatever the means, are in a new world to be able to do that. So I believe that, the people I work with have done a pretty nice job of it, but I don't think any of us would feel that we've solved anything yet. I still think we're learning.
Scott, what do you take away from this sector or section of our discussion?
I'm loving it. And I'm actually, again, trying to put this all together because I'm seeing so many different sort of threads going out, but they all come right back to this central theme of the mission over management. And what I might want to talk about with this one before, I have a final thought for later, but this one, I'm thinking about that connection and the disconnection, sort of the incongruence there. Like, how are we more connected now that we were disconnected? And I think it goes back to what CBS is doing. And tell me if this is accurate with what you've seen on the ground there, Jeff. So when we were connected before, we were connected in a surface level, sort of artificial way. We were connected by what before, when we were pre-pandemic? Distance. A water bottle where we can get water, a lunchroom. That feels like we're together and we are one unit. And look at us. We are here together doing this and we have each other's space and we know where these desks are. That's not connection. That's proximity. What we're talking about with connection is back to mission. Connection is not that I know you and you know me, or I'm next to you and you're next to me. That's how we see friendship amongst the other apes. But I think as humans, we have something a little bit deeper there. And what we're saying is it's not just physical proximity, right? But the community is actually that shared mission. And ultimately what goes back to that mission over management, that not saying management's bad, but maybe it's a layer that we've invested too much in, when in fact we could be investing a lot more in that mission and mission actualization. That's what I'm getting out of that, Glenn.
Well, if I can just jump forward then and just close with this thought for Jeff to ponder and share, if you wouldn't mind here, Jeff. Sure. What I heard Scott say in many respects is that this moment that we've been living since the pandemic has made us realize that what a shared mission is bringing us towards is a co-design that we're a co-design and architecture of the path forward. In other words, this collapse of standardization and this welcoming of this personalization outbreak has made it clear that the broader and more connected our perspectives are, and interconnected our perspectives are, the more opportunities that we can actually co-design together. What's your take on that, Jeff?
Yeah, I think you said that very well. I I have been reminded time and again, both for myself and from a lot of people around me, this statement that has been made of, boy, I've met so many people that I never knew before at work because of the pandemic. It's because we've been forced out of that rut of normalcy, which almost in some ways you could describe as becomes complacency. We had to reach out, and look for people that we didn't even know existed before to solve some of these unprecedented opportunities that were in front of us. And so I think that showed, right, that this new way forward will absolutely present opportunities for us to expand our horizons, work with more people, creates more opportunities for inclusion. And I do think that it was certainly a horrible set of circumstances that brought us to this point. But as industry is concerned, we needed the push. We needed the push to get out of the complacency of the way things used to be and the standardization of how we did a lot of things. And while I would certainly never want to do it by way of a pandemic, but it is where we are. And the pandemic has put us in a position to be able to get beyond a lot of those behaviors. Going back to the word standardization, a lot of those old ways of doing things, old ways of managing, old ways of seeing the world around us. And the prolonged nature of the pandemic has given us enough confidence to believe that we can be successful behaving differently. If it would have been a short-lived, 2-month-long event, back by spring when people went, home in March, I don't think we would have had the same forum, to progress. But the longevity, as unfortunate as it is, the longevity of the pandemic has given us the time to reshape our thinking and to become, jump on the train and go forward, to where it's going to lead us down the road.
Jeff, you've been inspiring today. I mean, if for everyone who's listening and watching, if Jeff hasn't given you perspective of how you should be thinking, what you should be appreciating, and how you should be contributing, I don't know what will. Jeff, you've been tremendous. I can't thank you enough for joining us today. And before I ask you to give us some closing thoughts, even though you closed really well there, Scott, give us your closing.
All right. This is the cycle. I see it, and I can see why it's working and why I trust it. Because what I hear you saying, man, is that we have to really think about the uniqueness and the opportunity to learn about this thing called leadership into the unknown, right? You've said that a couple different ways. So how do you lead into the unknown, right? Out of fear means that we just fall back on previous practices, but out of flow and out of forward thinking, you actually innovated. And what I saw you do is that you first of all recognized well before the pandemic that in order for CVS to be successful, for your group, your organization to be successful, one of the most important things you needed, right, was people who care and who are passionate. Your employees, you need passionate, caring employees. But we knew that getting into it. But the difference is, how do we get people that care, that are employees? Well, we build community. We make sure that this is a community, not a business, so to speak. It's a business, but to make people that care have this business, you have to have community. How do you build that community? Well, you're going to need a mission. And that mission needs to be very clear, straightforward, and something that you can repeat after hearing it once, right? Because that's how it can circle back to creating the community. But then what I saw you're doing in many ways is that when you created that mission, think about the mission of CVS. It's not about a bottom line. It's not about a certain quarterly figure. It's not about an investment return. It's literally a humanized mission, right? And so you did a human economy, you did a mission based on a human economy that then circled back and created more employees that care because they're part of a community, because they're bounded by a mission, and that's humanized. And that circle just keeps going around and around. It creates trust in the group, your employees. It creates trust in your customer because they see it and they feel it. right? And then the bottom line is this isn't just a circle that keeps going around. It's a spiral that goes up. I don't know where it's going, but I do know that when we hit the next speed bump, this is the sort of cycle that I'm going to be thinking about in terms of human organization. I really want to thank you for that upward spiral. We always talk about the downward spiral, right? Like the toilet flushing. Well, this is the complete opposite. This is bringing goodness upwards and sharing it all about. But thank you very much for that model, and I really appreciated the time to talk and learn from you today.
Any final thoughts, Jeff?
I think I'll go back to where we started the conversation. It was, you mentioned Pathfinder. And if the essence of the Pathfinder was to start with the end in mind, what a moment it is for me to reflect and say, well, we don't know what the end is here. And so therefore, as a leader, right, it puts me in the same odyssey as all the great, people out there working hard every day to figure the it out, because this new normal, we're not even sure what that looks like yet. So, the work that I do and the opportunity I have to share, my view and my efforts with my peers, again, traditionally would have been with some sort of an end in mind. Well, now the question is, well, what's the end we're looking for? So I agree. It's we're going into sort of uncharted territories, but we know that the best way we're going to get to those answers for sure, is to have that, whether it's the purpose that that unites us, but the individual contribution, the individual ideas, and the individual effort, right, of everybody involved, in pushing that, that rock uphill into the future. And there's not necessarily a formula or a standard way to get that done. And that's good, because that's what we need. We need to get rid of the standard formulas.
Jeff, outstanding. Thank you again for your time. And just as a reminder, when you lead in the age of personalization, you will see things that others don't, do what others won't, and keep pushing when prudence says quit. Thank you, everyone. And thank you again, Jeff.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Personalization Outbreak. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss a show. If you enjoyed the content, visit ageofpersonalization.com to check out our free streaming video series and learn how to get involved in the movement. I'm Glenn Yopes. I wish you a good day, and remember, without strategy, change is merely substitution, not evolution.